I'm Bernie Hobbs, and joining me today is Dr. James Bradfield Moody, who's co-author of the book The Sixth Wave and also founder and CEO of TuShare. Now, James, the book The Sixth Wave is all about waves of disruptive innovation. So can you tell us what these six waves are and why they had such a big impact on society and the economy?
Yeah, sure, Bernie. So it's interesting, since the Industrial Revolution, we've had what they call long waves of innovation. These things are about 30 to 40 years in length, and they always start with a lot of disruption. So a lot of new business models, a lot of new technologies being formed, coalesce around what they call dominant designs. And these dominant designs are things like Microsoft Windows or AC Power. Never heard of it. What's that thing? And they always finish with a global depression.
Okay.
And it turns out that, yeah, since the Industrial Revolution, they started off, it was all about milling. So it was, you might say, when we separated economic growth from labour. Before that, if you needed more chairs, you needed more people to make more chairs. Yeah. So the first wave was where we started to separate those two. The second one was all about the engine, the steam engine. We built railways, we connected cities. The third was about electrification. That was when we realised we could work longer, we could improve indoor air pollution. The fourth was about mass production, and then the fifth was about information and communications technology. And the book, The Sixth Wave, was really about saying, well, we've actually come to this point at the end of the fifth wave where we've had the disruption at the beginning. We've created a lot of the technologies. We've seen the dominant designs emerge around Windows and Microsoft and Google and others. Yeah. And we're just at that point of the global depression. So potentially we're actually at the cusp of a new wave of innovation, something that's going to come out of the end of the fifth, the global financial crisis.
So you just seem to be glossing over this global depression issue here. Was the GFC, the global financial crisis, do you think, or you think we've got a bit more?
That's what we saw in the research that we were doing. And in fact, there's a fascinating study that was done by Allianz, and you can actually see the waves of innovation. The last two in particular were very compelling. You can see the beginning after World War II, after the Great Depression, the beginning of the fourth wave. You can see it coalesce. Then the oil shocks in the 70s. Yeah. It was long but not very deep. That was the transition from the fourth to the fifth. And then we've seen the same thing happening. We've seen a big rise. The dot-com bust was not really a bust. It was just the moment when we stopped growing.
Not perfectly vertical growth.
Yeah. The growth wasn't increasing every single year. It went down, and then in global financial crisis, you can see the start of the transition from the fifth to the sixth wave.
So what is the sixth wave?
Well, it was interesting. We looked very hard at what caused these waves to occur. And generally what causes these waves to occur is not just one thing, but it's almost the perfect storm of three things happening together. Changes in technologies, changes in markets, and more importantly, and this is where we start getting to things like the circular economy, changes in the very institutions, the very fabric of society. So if we go back, and I'm always a fan of looking to the history before you look to the future.
I'm there with you.
Yeah, you sort of look at the fifth wave, and what was going on? Well, the changes in technology was called the microprocessor. And that was amazing because we were doubling the efficiency of technology every 18 months, right? The price-performance ratio of a microprocessor was doubling every 18 months. No technology had ever done that before. The institutional stuff, the fabric of society, was all about networking. And this was interesting because a network...
Sorry, when you say networking, you mean physical communication networking? Or?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. A technology that's networked. If you think about it by itself, if I ever got a mobile phone and you've got a mobile phone, Bernie, that's a great technology. We can call each other. But if suddenly everybody in the city has a mobile phone, its utility increases. If everybody in the country has a mobile phone, if half the people in the world have a mobile phone, you can actually see how the utility keeps on improving. And when you compare a networked technology like that to a non-networked technology, often the networked technology can sometimes overpower, even though it looks like it's not that useful, overpower the non-networked technology. So, I find it always fascinating. We have more mobile phones in the world, more people with access to a mobile phone than access to a toilet.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference between a networked technology and a non-networked, you might say, technology. So we're seeing technology going, the microprocessor, powered by these network effects, and the market, the value that we are creating, was all about transaction cost.
So, not an economist, so just spell out transaction cost.
So a transaction cost, for example, if I wanted a paperclip right now, we could pause everything, we could go and find a paperclip. It might take me a minute to go and scramble around and take a paperclip. Now, if we're thinking about everybody who's who's listening and everybody having to wait for this paperclip, our combined time is probably worth a lot more, in fact orders of magnitude more than the value of the paperclip.
Yeah.
That was the transaction cost involved in me getting the paperclip as opposed to the paperclip itself. And it was Nicholas Negroponte and others that actually identified this research that had been done by economists called Coase that identified that perhaps the fifth wave, so the wave that we've just finished, was all about taking transaction cost, extracting the value out of reducing that transaction cost in some ways. So you might have thought, in the same way, a book, the amount of time it took me to go and buy a book was worth more than the book itself. So Amazon comes along and reduces the transaction cost of that, and then monetizing that process. So you put those three things together and you can start to see how these waves emerge. You have huge amount of value to be captured. You have some sort of institutional fabric of society thing going on, which was all about networking, and you have an enabling technology. So if you take that and then you sort of fast forward and you say, where is the same thing starting to happen? And we identified, and this is what happened in the sixth wave, we identified that the biggest candidate and the prime area that we saw was, think about that paperclip again. It's not just about the transaction cost of the paperclip, maybe it's about now the resources involved in the paperclip itself, because you don't just value the paperclip the amount of time it takes to get it, but how much energy did it take to make that paperclip? How much water? How many tons of iron ore, were moved in order to get to that paperclip?
And greenhouse emissions?
And greenhouse emissions, and changes in biodiversity and so on. And so we identified that perhaps in the same way that the fifth wave was all about, transaction costs and I guess improving efficiency that way, maybe, and I guess our research pointed to the fact that the sixth wave could actually be about resource efficiency, or its counterpart, resource productivity.
Well, I think it makes perfect sense from where we're sitting and what we've been talking and hearing about. So
absolutely, and the reason why I think it's really interesting is because you see the changes happening in all three areas. You've got the market where you're doing the same thing. We're seeing rising demand for resources, at the same time increasing scarcity. And when demand and scarcity starting to hit, that you get increases in price. We're seeing some really interesting business models emerging, and this is where the fabric of society starts to change, around this circular economy, around collaborative consumption, around ways in which we're taking waste and realizing that waste is no longer waste. Waste is actually unsellable production. Waste is actually potentially valuable if you think about it differently. And we're seeing these enabling technologies coming along, which are actually, whether it's clean technologies or indeed mobile technologies and others that are actually enabling new marketplaces, new ways of taking waste and turning it into something much more valuable.
So in other words, your work points to the circular economy being right at the heart of the sixth wave.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like we're moving from an old mode of operation to a new mode of operation. At the old mode where we've been previously just harvesting resources that were plentiful and cheap, to one where we're going to be managing resources that are scarce and valuable. And you realise that if you move from that sort of harvest mentality to much more of a management mentality, you realise that actually things do happen in circles. In fact, there's no, you put a real premium on things that can, just be borrowed for a while. Why have one-way chemical reactions? Why not have chemical reactions that, can recover the raw resources and so on? So yes, the circular economy does become one of the central drivers for the sixth wave of innovation.
Yeah, there's one organisation that's been doing that for, Nature. That's what it is, Nature. I knew it sounded a bit familiar. So what should companies do to succeed in a world of limited resources?
Well, it's interesting, Ben. We actually identified 5 big rules of thumb. You might, and in some ways, 5 business models that companies could follow in order to really capitalise and really succeed in this world of limited resources. And one of them was look to nature. You think about nature. Nature's a great, engineer. Nature runs off sunlight. Nature really consumes things as close as it can to the point of production. Nature takes feedstock from one process and turns it into another process. Nature does two-way chemical reactions. If you look at us, even ourselves, where everything we consume can turn into a feedstock for something else. So actually, one of them was look to nature, and there are many technologies out there where we're starting to say, hey, we can make the hull of a ship The same as, let's copy the ventricles on shark skin, right? And in fact, there's a ship's hull now that if you go anything more than 4 knots, all the barnacles fall off, which improves the efficiency of the ship. It means that you don't have to clean it, and basically means that the lifespan of the hull is longer. So absolutely looking to nature.
Yeah. So you're talking biomimicry here.
Biomimicry, yeah.
Okay, so there's biomimicry, but what are some of the other business models that companies can look to?
Well, there's a really obvious one, you might say, which is waste equals opportunity. The idea there that you can take waste from one process and turn it into something else. And yes, there's, on one level that's quite simple, where you can say things like we're starting to do landfill mining, really clear ways of thinking about waste. But there's also a lot of other hidden waste streams that we don't normally consider. Take this room, for example. We've got, what's going to happen to these chairs at the end of its life?
I might take them home because they're pretty sweet.
Nice,
yeah.
But is there waste heat escaping out of this out of the ceiling? What's happening to the roof of this building? Is it collecting energy? We might be here. We might not be riding a bike or driving a car. If we own a bike or a car, is somebody using it? No, there's an idle asset. So there's lots of ways of thinking about waste.
Yeah, so it's not just about waste, like something at the end of its life, but it's an inefficiently or ineffectively used resource.
And absolutely, and that actually led us to the third really big rule of thumb, which we think is even more profound than waste equals opportunity, and it's this idea that let's sell services and not sell products. Because the interesting thing is, if you think about products, you don't necessarily need to own the bike. You just need access to the bike.
My heart's breaking because my bike was stolen last week. But anyway, let's move on from that.
Yeah. You need access to a bike.
I hope they're sharing it, yeah.
That's the shared economy at work. No, but the interesting thing is we're realising that actually the idea of ownership in some cases does have a very, very inherent conflict of interest. Imagine say I'm a company that makes washing machines, and I want to sell you a washing machine, Bernie. How long do you want that washing machine to last for?
Oh, I'm the queen of buy the best white good that's going to last forever. So I want one that lasts for 17 to 20 years.
70 or forever, even.
Oh yeah, right.
Fascinating how we get.
Didn't know that was an option.
Well, but as me as the producer, how long do I want that washing machine to last for, right? And you could say, well, the real incentive, the economic incentive, other things aside, is actually the warranty period plus a couple of days. So we actually have a misaligned incentive right there, which is that you want that to last for probably longer than I do. If we change that business model around completely, and instead we say, actually, why don't I give you the washing machine, and I'll just charge you 5 cents a wash. Right? So I'm not actually selling you a washing machine anymore. I am selling you the service of clean clothes.
That's absolutely genius, because the thing that stops people from buying the top quality, long-lasting thing is the upfront cost. But if you're charging for that's fantastic.
And the fascinating thing that then happens is, yes, the incentives align, that we want both that asset to last as long as possible. Moreover, I might start, I have to monitor the washing machine to see when you're using it. Why don't I check whether it's going to be balanced or not? So if you're always putting in the unbalanced washing, I might say, actually, that wasn't our agreement. You're going to have so the washing machine lasts longer. I might start bundling services, other services, so say the detergent service. And so suddenly I'm building a washing machine that I can get clean clothes, but with half the detergent, because it will save me money, or no detergent. I could even start bundling the water. And you can see what happens as soon as you move to a service model, not a product model, everything aligns around resource efficiency. And so you see businesses where on one side, yes, we're trying to take waste and turn it into something else, and other business models where we can take services and really start combining them, start to compose the services that we want, rather than just trying to sell us a lot of products.
Fantastic. So that's 3 now: biomimicry, waste equals opportunity, and services, not things.
Yep, products. And the fourth one we found was really, you might say, underpinning those other ones, and that was actually how do you know where the waste is, right? Or how do you sell the services rather than products? How do you measure whether people are consuming the services? And it's actually this one that we're starting to see all over the place. And it's the idea that the digital and the natural worlds start to converge. And you might say that, so how do I measure the waste? Is I start to understand, what is the digital version of this chair? I'm tracking the chair. I'm tracking the bottle. I'm tracking things so that I know where they are and whether they're still in their useful life. Selling services, that washing machine, you start to have to think, well, what's the digital version of it? Actually, I'm monitoring it, I'm measuring it. And I guess the central idea there was that eventually, and these are 30-year waves, but eventually every single thing in the natural world starts to have a digital counterpart.
When you say, I might be taking this too literally, you're not talking about sensors in the chair, or are you?
Oh, it could be. I mean, it could be, like a
smart fabric or something.
Radio frequency ID tag, where it's saying, it just says a simple, I'm a chair, it replaces the barcode on the chair.
Right.
It could be, already I have my digital version. It's called my mobile phone.
Right.
Well, it knows where I am.
Yeah.
It knows, it eventually will have my wallet, it will have my keys. It'll be measuring my heartbeat, so it knows whether I'm alive or not, and hopefully if I'm not alive, who to call, right?
Just beforehand, hopefully,
Yes, hopefully. You got the building has its building management system. The glass, again, one day a company might end up saying, we're going to sell glasses as a service, and they're going to make glasses that are totally unbreakable, but they're also going to put little tags in there so they know that it's their glass. So you can start to see a world where all the things in the natural world eventually have a digital counterpart. And very interestingly, with things like augmented reality and others, we start seeing things in the digital world starting to overlay the natural world as well.
Yeah, man. Number 5, what's the last one?
Well, this is the last one, which was really, it's interesting. The world also starts separating around, things we consume. So if you think about that waste, all the waste is really us in a world of consumption. Right? It's us as biological entities, very smart monkeys running around, consuming things, water, consuming food, and so on, doing the stuff that monkeys do. Then there's another world, which is the world of things we use. This is the world of services, right? And in that world, it's us using smart tools, it's using iPhones, it's using washing machines, and so on. And there's these two worlds are sometimes called the biosphere, which is the world of things we consume as biological entities, and the technosphere, which is the world of us and technology. Now what happens is in the world of the business models start to go in completely different directions in the biosphere and the technosphere. And this leads us to that 5th rule of thumb, the rule of thumb that basically, you might say atoms are local, the biosphere is local, but bits are global, right? That the technologies, the things we have around us become very global. And it really points to the fact that, if it's anything to do with consumption. So that will become as local as possible. Local food production, local sewage treatment, everything to do around, to the point where it might even be done in the house or on the balcony. But anything to do with information, anything to do with services starts to become delivered in a very global nature. Whether it's your radio service, where you can no longer have to pick the local radio stations, but you can go and listen to something from Canada, to where my friends are, and so on. So bits are global, atoms are local, becomes the 5th rule of thumb.
And that really neatly ties in with what you're doing at the moment. You're actually building your own 6th wave company called TuShare. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, we realised, I had an interesting insight after I wrote the 6th wave, and I think there's an expression that we have, which is, well, it's, eat your own dog food, they sometimes say. And it was like I really wanted to take part in what I see as an amazing revolution, period of disruption. And if you'd start taking those rules of thumb and start to apply them, we realised that there was one great source of waste, or one great source of idle assets that were sitting around, and that was, as a father of 2 young children, all the stuff that sits in people's houses that they're never going to use again. And you can ask that question, why is there stuff in people's houses that they're never going to use again, right? And it turns out it's because of one of 4 reasons. They're either life stage items, so they're kids' clothes, or I change shape, or I move house, or whatever, to do with the life stage. They're media, so books and CDs and DVDs. They're upgradables, so mobile phones, sporting equipment, kitchenware. Or they're fashion, like handbags or shoes or whatever, where the item often is no longer fashionable.
So it's of its own cycle.
It's got its own cycle.
Might become important again.
And when you do the market research, you realise there's actually 100 billion of these items
in my
that get
house,
sold.
actually.
Not in your, yeah, you got 50 billion, I got 50 billion. 100 billion of these items get sold new every year around the world.
God.
That by their very nature are probably not going to see their full lifespan under the first owner. And we started to ask the question, and even, you know, even with marketplaces like eBay and others, even with, you know, charity and recycling, that's only, it's very hard to get the numbers, anything from 5 to 50%. There's, in fact, more likely 5 for most categories. And we said, why is this? And our research and our thinking led us to this insight. And the insight was because the competition is too great. And what is the competition for these items? It's actually the bin or doing nothing. And you start thinking about it and you realise actually the bin is, you know, a crowning achievement of humanity, right? You know, you think about the bin is, it's not, a bin in your house is not just a $5 piece of plastic. A bin is a $5 piece of plastic, which is the user interface to billions of dollars worth of infrastructure. Billions of dollars of infrastructure of, you know, you know, collection and shipment and logistics and processing and so on. And what we've done over the last 200 years is actually created a wonderfully frictionless service, a wonderful service around this thing called the bin.
Damn smart monkeys.
Exactly, and it's, you know, we did some research, you know, a third of people just last year admit to throwing away perfectly good things in the bin because it was easier. And I think a side effect of making the bin, and the bin has created wonderful benefits for us in terms of public health and others, but one of the side effects is that we've made waste so easy. And then we actually did the same thing for recycling, which is great as well. We made that easy, we've copied that whole infrastructure again, a new bin in the house. What happens is reuse, the idea of finding a second owner for something, becomes hard in comparison.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why these things, and you know, often get left on a shelf because that's quite easy as well, or actually, you know, end up in the bin. So we said, what would it take to actually create a service, a reuse service that was as easy as the bin? And that's where the idea of our company TuShare.com came in.
So how does TuShare work?
So what we realised is that basically we need a marketplace, and if you want to be as easy as the bin, right, you need to really focus on what is the simplest way of getting an item from me to you. And we said, well, the first choice we made is let's make it all about giving, because you know what's hard? Selling is hard. You got to negotiate. You got to warrant the item. Swapping is actually hard because I've got to have something you want. You've got to have something I want. Lending is hard, right? Because you've got to securitize it. So we just said, let's make it all about giving. Then we said, for giving to work, it's got to be very, very social. So TuShare is much more like a community, a social space for people to actually give and get stuff for each other from free. But the real piece that we realised, so it's not enough just to have a giving marketplace and make it social, but the real thing was getting the item from one person to another needs to be as easy, you might say in the long term, as
bidding it,
putting in the bin. So we realised that what was missing was a logistics service. What was really missing was a way of getting the item from A to B. So we worked with a lot of courier companies, identified the fact that they also had, you know, idle capacity, you might say, and some of this, and work with them. And now we can actually ship items from A to B, from me to you when you need it, and we do it door to door.
So you're really talking about logistics for reuse?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So we've got billions of dollars worth of infrastructure for waste, billions of dollars worth of infrastructure for recycling. What we want to do is build the logistics for reuse in Australia and maybe one day around the world. And the really interesting thing is that if you start thinking of it as an infrastructure problem, as a logistics problem, you take a completely different approach. And for us, it was about creating a business where you could think very hard. You know, it's almost like the opposite of a lot of business models at the moment, where it's maybe, you know, sell you as much stuff and then give you the postage for free. What we do is we try to source the items for free in your community, in your social network, and then we actually pay for the postage. And it completely flips the idea of how you might actually consume these items or source these items on its head.
And I love how beautifully aligned the value there is with the thing that actually costs. So you've already, like, the thing that you're sharing is owned and there's no more cost going to be associated with it, but the transport of it is the thing with all the implication for waste and resource consumption, and that's what is being paid for. It's a really beautiful marriage, I guess, of those ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And the really interesting thing is it actually ends up aligning the business model of the company with its purpose, right? So the purpose of the company is to help things see their full lifespan, right? The business model of the company means that it earns revenue when things see their full lifespan.
Fantastic.
And in fact, it basically you're paying for access rather than paying for ownership. And for us, that's why we became a benefit corporation. That's why, you know, for me, the circular economy business models are the ones that can actually have a very clear alignment between things like resource efficiency or things like, you know, improving society or the social purpose, aligning those, you know, with the business model of the company.
Well, it makes sense. That's where the idea came from. So it's nice that it's working so well. So what's your vision for the future for TuShare?
Well, I think the idea of TuShare in the future is that we really do want to see every item see its full lifespan in the future, and that really means that we turn reuse into a habit. You know, it's fascinating. Waste is sort of a habit, right? You finish with something, and hopefully for many families, recycling is a habit.
Yeah.
How do we actually turn reuse into a habit? And for us, making something a habit is really three things. It's one is getting rid of the friction, making it easy. The second thing is actually finding a trigger. So eventually we'd love to find ways in which we can trigger the thought of I've finished with this item and turning it into, you know, putting it out there. And the third is basically, you know, the rewards. And in our community, the rewards are all about generosity and it's all about gratitude and making, you know, it actually makes you happy to give things away.
Completely.
Yes, that's our vision. If we can actually turn reuse into a habit by making it really easy, I think we will have done an amazing thing, and we will save billions of kilograms of items from going into landfill.
It's brilliant. So this is all part of the broader trend of the sharing economy. Why is it disruptive?
Well, the sharing economy is disruptive because it focuses on a completely different set of drivers. The sharing economy, you might say, is really coupling together three big trends. The first is that we are finding all these idle assets that we didn't think of them much before, but it is the idle rooms in people's houses. They translate to Airbnb. It's the idle time that people might be having while driving from place to place. That translates into Uber. It's the...
I'm going to pretend I know what Uber is because I'm so hip to the new stuff. But
yeah, you know, and car sharing.
Yeah, okay.
You know, and a whole lot of others. So the sharing economy, it's that first one. The second one, it's really tapping into another trend of the fact that we can have mobile phones, the fact that we can have very access all the time to very small scale marketplaces as well. You can imagine what Airbnb's done is actually created a marketplace around rooms in people's houses and so on. And the third, it's part of a bigger social trend, which is where we do start to value access over ownership. We actually start to value the service over the product. There's a company in Australia, a car share company called GoGet, and what they do is, you know, they're starting off by replacing the second car in many families, because the second car is often not driven all the time. So just give that access to car share, and then slowly that becomes the first car, and so on. And this business model is extremely disruptive because the efficiency improvements that you get by sharing things can often be quite astronomical.
Yeah.
The car share company, GoGet, estimates that every one car share company, car that they have for sharing, takes 10 cars off the road.
Including ours, actually.
Yeah, there you go.
We haven't had a car for 3 years. It's all been shared.
And you know, think about that's a 90% efficiency improvement. And those business models, you know, they're very attractive because they not only, you know, save money because there's so much efficiency, they also build community, because suddenly you're actually having to interact with people a bit more, and of course they're positive for the environment. They're much more circular economy type business models.
So what will this kind of disruptive innovation and sharing economy, what will it mean for the broader general economy? Well,
it's really interesting. You know, going back to these waves of innovation, there's a potential that the sixth wave, this wave, could be almost as fundamental and disruptive as the first wave of innovation, the Industrial Revolution. And if we look back, what was going on in the Industrial Revolution? It was the time when we did start to decouple economic growth from labour.
Yep.
You know, and we're still going down that path. But you think about that, before that moment, for the entire history of the world, economic growth and labour had been coupled. You know, and before that there were people, I think Malthus was one of them, who wrote a paper saying, we'll never escape subsistence, because if you want more food, you need more people to grow more food, so therefore there'll be more mouths to feed and so on. But what we did was
he wasn't thinking about eugenics, obviously.
You know, what we really found was that, you know, no, that was not necessarily correct. And for me, the really interesting point that we're at the moment is, so we did that. We actually decoupled economic growth from labour. Potentially what's happening around the sixth wave, around resource efficiency, the circular economy, this is the moment when we start decoupling economic growth from resource consumption. Because even though we decoupled economic growth from labour about 200 or so years ago, since then we've still had economic growth and resource consumption very, very tightly linked.
Yeah.
You can plot the two together, and the more we grew, the more we consumed. So, but now potentially, and you know, we still have Malthus events at the moment saying it can't be done, but I think we're starting to see all these business models are really ways at tackling this idea, the idea that you can actually start seeing economic growth without necessarily consuming more resources. And then we start focusing on, you know, just as we focus on labour productivity, we can, as a fundamental part of our economy, we can start focusing on resource productivity as a fundamental part of our economy. So for me, a vision of the world, and these things take time. You know, it can be 5, 10, probably 30 years is the time when we do start saying, hey, we can have services, we can have the things we want, we can get access to the things we need, but let's find a way of doing that in the most efficient way possible, which means decoupling that value, the value we have, from the resource that we're actually consuming.
Oh, brave new world. Let's get
Absolutely.
there. That's been fantastic. Thanks so much, James.